Hello, and welcome to the Balticon 55 panel on revising your work. My name is Joshua Bilmes. I'm the head of Jabberwocky Literary Agency and have been representing authors in the science fiction field for 35 years, and I'm pretty editorially hands-on, so I've gotten to ask people to do lots of revising, including Nick Martell, whom I met at Balticon a few years ago, and then sold his first novel, Kingdom of Liars, that's behind me. And I remember being on the train back from Balticon and realizing I was gonna have to tell Nick he needed to do a lot of revising, but I loved his books, they're great. I will let the other panelists introduce themselves, and I'll start with DH.
Hi, I'm DH Aire. I'm an indie author. My 21st book has just come out. Bigfoot is Not Your Friend. I'm a member of SIFLA, and I do a heck of a lot of revising.
Okay, and Sarah Beth, we have two Sarahs, so I'm going to be saying Sarah Beth and Sarah. So Sarah Beth, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm Sarah Beth Durst. I write fantasy for adults, teens, and kids. My newest book, which is number 22, is called The Bone Maker. It came out in April. It's a standalone epic fantasy about second chances and bone magic, and it came out from Harper Voyager. And I absolutely loved writing it and revising it like 30 times.
Okay, and Sarah?
I am Sarah Pinsker. Hold on, I can do this. That's We Are Satellites. It's my third book, second novel. I have about 50 short stories out. I write science fiction and fantasy and horror, mostly short, some long.
Okay. I think, and then a bit of housekeeping. You can put a question into the Q&A at any time. When I'm doing virtual panels, I don't necessarily wait to the end to be getting into questions from the audience. So, and those are welcome. And so I'm going to just dive right into this. Sarah, why don't you tell us about like your biggest, most major revision in a book, and like why it was happening, how you navigated through it?
The biggest one for me was probably when I sold my first novel, A Song for a New Day. The editor said, I love this, and we're going to have to make a big change to the format. I had written it as a song. I had written it as a literal song. That was how I got through writing it, was I had decided to be all clever about it. And I had two characters. And so I considered one the A part of a song, which is usually, like, A and B are usually verse and chorus. So I said one character was the verse and one character was the chorus, and I had them alternating. And then I had a chapter that was a bridge, and it took place on a bridge. And I had a coda, and I had a 16-bar solo that took place in 16 bars. And I had all these things that I had done just to play games to write a novel. And the editor who bought it said, this is wonderful, and this works as a song, but that's not necessarily something that works as a story. As a novel, the characters need to come back more often is the problem. Like your chunks are too big. And she was right. Like the tension, you missed the other character when you were away for that long. And so I broke up the song. The bridge is still in there. The coda is still in there. The 16-bar solo is still in there. But the verses and choruses are no longer verses and choruses. It had to become a book, not a song.
And Sarah Beth, same question.
Yeah. First off, I love 16 bar solo. Like there were actually 16 bars that they went like.
Yeah,
16
that was when she went out on tour on her own, so it was
I love
solo,
it.
and it was yeah.
That's so clever. I love that. I actually, my biggest revision was fairly recently. It was my newest book for kids because I write for middle grade as well as adult, and it was from this book, Catalyst, which is for ages 8 through 12, and it's about a giant cat. She adopts a tiny kitten and it keeps growing and growing and growing and growing, and then it starts talking. And originally it was a science fiction book, and it is now a fantasy book. So it completely, like, totally changed, and it's so much better now.
And DH?
So Bigfoot, I finished the entire book, sent it to my editor. My editor liked the book, but said I had to make a major change to the entire novel because I had an idea that she said was not marketable. I needed to come up with another way to do it, or I was going to alienate a good section of the audience. That I thought I was being clever, but it wouldn't work. So I took months to go from the novel beginning to end and change one of the premises of what I was doing. It was a little painful, but the story's better for it.
So starting with DH, I'd like to get a little more into the craft of this. So you had this big revision. How did you move the pieces around? What were, how did you get it to work?
So my problem was I was doing a pandemic. There was another reason I needed to slow down because COVID hit after I wrote it. And I also had to take another look at that for the story to be post-COVID. So I was writing a sarcastic apocalypse that was an adventure story, mishmashing a whole bunch of apocalypses. And I had loved the idea going into this book that I was going to kind of devolve people into Neanderthals. And as there's no Neanderthal genetics in the African American community, it wasn't going to affect a large part of the African American community. But it was going to affect the white community in a big way. And my editor said, no, don't do it that way. So I went back and I thought about Logan's Run, where they're huddled in a Chesapeake Bay community. And when you hit 30, you've reached population max and all the 30-year-olds have to die. So I decided that I would need to write my plague that everyone over 21 up until around the age of 50 would become Bigfoot. But it wouldn't affect those for hormonal reasons past a certain age. And therefore it was more equal. So I really had to look at every aspect of what I was doing with my characters. And if I had a character who I wanted to be in the book and not a Bigfoot, I might have to adjust their age because I suddenly have an entire new theory of how this manufactured plague was being created by a mad scientist who it got out of control of. It's meant to be sarcastic. It's meant to be humorous to a certain sense. But then with the COVID piece, it became, take your time on this because we're all living COVID, and I didn't want it. It just made it touchy, and it'll be even more touchy in the sequels because I'm going to be referencing certain things we've learned about the experience of COVID in bigger ways.
And Sarah Pinsker, same question. You had all of these things that you were told couldn't be there. So, do you just realize they actually don't need to be there and poof, you take them out? Or how do you patch it up after if you
Well,
needed to?
it wasn't that they couldn't be there, it was that they couldn't be in the places that they were.
Mm.
Most of, I think that most of the chapters actually survived, that it worked with a different intercutting. I had it sort of in these big chronological chunks, and I played with time more in the final version. but mostly it was a matter. I work in Scrivener, which is a great software. I highly recommend it if you are someone who's writing at novel length. Not everyone does, but for me, it was really helpful. You can turn chapters into like basically post-its or note cards, and you can color code them. So I color coded them by character, and you can you can move them around and then revert if something doesn't work. So I used Scrivener and just did a lot of playing around with where things should actually be. And then transitions obviously needed to be edited at that point. But it's always useful to go for the big stuff first, like the big timeline stuff and anything that you're messing with that's sort of big picture conceptual. If you do that first, then you can go in later and do all the tiny little stuff, and maybe some of it disappears by then. Some of the smaller stuff that you wanted to get to may not even be an issue once you've done that. So I would using Scrivener is tremendously helpful to me. And then focusing on the big stuff and just going for it, knowing that I have other versions saved and that anything I do can be turned back.
Sarah Beth, do you also use Scrivener? I know a lot of my clients do, but not everybody.
No, I just use Word.
Okay.
It works for me. It's fine.
Yeah.
And like Sarah was saying, like I save all prior versions. Not only because it gives you the ability to go back, but it gives you the courage to move forward, because if you go in the wrong direction, it's okay, because you can always go back to the other. And even if you never look at it again, it gives you that sort of security. So I have a little setup of folders, and I have one called thoughts, one called research, one called scenes, and then I have my master document. And so I'll work on each scene in their own Word doc, and when I get it nice, I copy it into the big master document, which I guess is my impression of kind of what Scrivener does, but I sort of just splooge it together in Word, and it's worked fine.
The thing that I like about doing it in Scrivener is that that's all in like one window. Like you can have a little pane that has your, that reminds you of different people's nicknames for each other, or where a scene is, or what perspective it is. Like you can have all this like running data down the side that doesn't get included, but you don't have to switch between windows to get to it.
Yeah, I should probably use that. I usually have lots of Word doc open, things open of notes on this, notes on that, this file, that file.
It's that thing of like holding it in your head. Like I find that it helps me see things so I don't have to worry about them being in my head, because it externalizes them.
Oh, see, that's the thing that I love about the revision process. I do a lot of revisions per book before I even let my editor even see it. Like I'm talking like a dozen before I label it draft one. I love that point when you've gone through it so many times that it's like a tapestry, and if you pull this thread, then that thread will do that thread will do that. So I love when you get to that point.
DH, you have any productivity tools to help with the revision process?
So I'm a pantser, right? So I will start writing, and then I'll go back and rewrite to write the next section, and then I'll go back and rewrite to write the next section. And when I get to the end of a book, if it's going to have a sequel, I keep going. I have the end of the book I was working on, and I keep writing. I may have 20,000 words leading into the next novel, so I have continuity to get to that, because I have that first draft to base off of. And then I'll go back and forth. What I'm realizing now, About a year and a half ago, I was at Capclave and went to a novella panel. And they were talking about the joys of writing novellas. And at the same time, I was hearing about the importance of writing reader magnets. So now I've been writing some novellas as reader magnets to lead into stories. And they have been working their way into the sequels and into my mindset of what I had before that I want to give some background to. And it's just helping me think on a whole bunch of different levels about characters I might not have focused on so much, but who have important stories to share and become good introductions to the novels I'm trying to promote in the short term. So I just write. Whenever I have a chance, I write. And if you don't keep writing on a daily and weekly basis, I find it's hard to write because you have to get in again. So I always like to have something I've written so I can jump into that, remember my mindset, and move forward. My editor complains that also happens for me to change tenses quite frequently, and that tells her where I jump back in.
Well, that's what the revision process is for. One of the things a bunch of my clients do is they have a drafting stage where they kind of take the 10% off the top. They write long in the first draft and then pare it down. Is that something that anyone on the panel finds with their work?
With novels, I have so far not had one yet that didn't end up getting cut a bit. So I guess I do write long. With short stories, I often miss. My first draft is sometimes to get the idea on the page, and then I have to go back and I send it to my crit group and I look at it again. And there's usually one of those places where you can do the Theodore Sturgeon, like ask the next, that's my cue, ask the next question. Where there's usually points where I have to recognize I haven't fully developed the idea yet, and I have to push a little further and a little further. So short stories tend to get longer and my novels tend to get shorter.
So could you maybe go into that process for a specific book and talk about some of the things maybe that you cut? Was it just words? Was there a subplot? Was there a lot, just...
I haven't yet had to cut a subplot, and that seems like a hideous process to me from what I've heard. Most of mine has been some of it is basic word count. Like I can get rid of 1,000 words just by doing a search for the word just and the word. There are a few words that I can shave a fair bit off by weighing out on my weasel list. And then after that, I read everything out loud, and I look for the parts that are redundant. Like when I'm reading it out loud, I tend to notice if something is familiar, if and I guess the other thing that I'll do is I'll write down scene by scene who's in a scene, where they are. I don't usually outline beforehand. I had to for this most recent book, but I write down who it is, where they are, what they're talking about, and I try to identify that scene does 3 things for the book, whether it's like deepen that relationship between those characters or introduce a concern about blah blah blah. Like there have to be things that are propelling that are justifying that scene's existence. So sometimes I'll cut individual scenes or shorten individual scenes if they aren't doing what they needed to do. But yeah.
I want to ask a follow-up because I certainly notice, and I think, what are some of the other words that can be on your like overused list? And does that vary? Because I've noticed that a lot of my clients will have in a book the word that they're clearly using too much.
I have a list that I can actually paste into the chat. These are not all words that need to go away, but they're words that I can that each time you use it, you can weigh it and decide whether it actually deserves to be there. So it's a long list, and ignore the pluses next to it. That's just when I go through it, I put a plus or take away a plus depending on which round I was on for that story, so that I know that I've done that one already. But this is a very long list. Obviously, some of these words are words that can exist. Like you can't write the book without was and were, particularly in the past tense. But there's a lot of times when it's a substitution for a stronger verb. So if I look at some of these things, there's often a stronger word that can be used in its place. Down and up are on there because you can say sit down, or you can just say like she sat down, or you can say she sat. So if I search for down, I can decide whether down belongs and that sort of thing.
I would be curious to see the list. I have a list of words that I'm most likely to talk to my clients about. I'm wondering if there's overlap.
Mine's all in the chat now.
Okay. True story. I think it was 2016. I read a fantasy novel that had, it was a long fantasy novel, but it had 65 uses of the word wince in it, which I thought was a lot of wincing. And the final version got that down to around 25 uses. Sarah Beth, anything you'd want to add to, just kind of the what goes when you're cutting, and any examples if you want to give from your own work?
Yeah, I mean, I usually end up cutting a couple talking animals here and there because I tend to include far too many. But usually my novels grow rather than needing cutting. I find I sort of build a novel from the inside out. My first draft tends to be more of a skeleton, and then the next draft I'm adding the muscles so it moves, and then the heart and the lungs, and then last the hair and the eyes, and getting the words themselves right. So they tend to grow. I will occasionally write first draft scenes where it's just the people are talking to each other, and I'm trying to figure out what they feel and where they're going and what they're bantering about, and trying to make them feel as real as possible to me. And they won't be anywhere. I'll put in brackets of maybe they shouldn't be just floating in space, and they should be doing something. And then the next draft through, I'll be refining it and making it come to life more. I definitely do have words like Sarah Pinsker does. I don't think I've kept a active list like that, but I did discover. So I have this one book, one of my kids' books, where the main character is a girl made of stone. It's called The Stone Girl Story, and I realized when I was writing it, she's made of stone. So I discovered how often I use her gut clenched and butterflies in the stomach and her throat. And she doesn't have any of that. She's made of stone. She can't smell anything. So I discovered all these words that I just used as sort of crutches for revealing what the emotion was. And I had to find new ways that made me really conscious of that sort of common words. Oh, and I also find particular books, you kind of fall in love with a verb. And it's not a very common word, and then you've used it 20 times. You're maybe stop that.
I always think about Bujold and the eyebrows quirking.
Yes.
In the Vorkosigan books, everyone quirks their eyebrows.
I hate the word. I hate people who quirk smiles and quirk eyebrows. Just a thing with me, but I hate the word quirk when I'm reading a book. So it's like the nails and the chalkboard.
My problem word was rasped.
Rasped.
I didn't want to use the word said. So I had I had reader feedback that said, why is everyone rasping throughout the book? And I thought, okay, I have to go back and get rid of rasped as often as possible. And then all subsequent books, if I use rasped, they have to actually be rasping.
Mm-hmm.
And then I stop using it, because unless I really want them having a raspy voice, they're not rasps.
long arguments about myself whether
But, you know, people-
sentence has enough S's to qualify for a she hissed. Because I love hissed. You know, they don't always have the sibilants in them. Or how do you pronounce the word? How do you pronounce that? Sibilant? I don't know.
Yeah.
Sarah Beth, do you work from an outline, or do you just go for it? I'm just curious because I liked your description of the skeleton and then adding the heart and the lungs and everything so much.
I do outline, but it's more of just like a page of bulletins. I don't like if you talk to Peter Brett about outlining, you'll feel like you've never outlined in your entire life because he does these huge, amazingly long outlines.
Yeah.
I have a page of bullet points that I then don't follow. So
Josh, when you talked, you cut out a subplot. I had first drafted 5 novels in 3 months. And when I started doing final cuts, when I got to book 2, I had to cut out a third of the book because I felt it was a digression. When I went to book 3, I held off and took the digression and made it an entire novel. Because I didn't want to lose it. I loved it, but it didn't belong in book 2. It just took everyone away from the main characters. So I made them their own main characters and sidebarred my other characters around them so they all connected up again. And then book 3 will be book 4 when I write it.
So I once, from Brandon Sanderson's Elantris, I had him take out like, or asked him, ultimately his choice, take out a very huge scene with the Mad Prince character, which you can see in like the 10th anniversary edition trade paperback. It gets to see print, but literally like 10,000 words, I believe. And when I started working with Nick Martell, the bulk of the first 20,000 words of the first draft that I read ended up leaving before the final draft. So I'm wondering, what is the longest stretch of manuscript that the panelists have ever revised out of one of their books? Sarah Beth, you wanna start?
probably about 50,000 words. Yeah, that was the one that went from science fiction to fantasy because it needed to change quite a bit. The whole book was only like 60,000 words, so yeah, that was a lot. Honestly, though, with every single book, I mean, I touch every word in every sentence multiple times, so quite often, none of the same words. The finished product looks nothing like where it started from, because for me, it's a matter of finding the right details to cast a spell over the reader. The thing that's going to bring it the most to life. And sometimes that takes a while to find the right words, and you end up over the course of many, many edits changing the entire thing. And then sometimes it comes out and you're like, oh no, that's right. And you can't really tell when you're first writing it, so you just have to go write, see what happens.
Sarah.
The first draft of A Song for a New Day also include, and I think this was before it got to the editor, this was gone, but I had originally included the novelette, Our Lady of the Open Road, in the novel. That had been the thing that I had used that I had written previously. And it sort of moved towards it. And then I realized it didn't belong in the novel. So that whole section came out again.
There's a question in the Q&A from Terry Cox. Do you have any advice regarding structural choices / revisions, changes of voice, tense, style, tone, literary devices? Like, I guess one of those things would be you decide to move a book from first to third person or from third to first person, or but what would some of the answers to that be? And DH, I'll start with you.
I used to write third person. Now, every time I write sections that are one person's point of view in first person. I have a lot of psychic characters, so sometimes they hear each other's internal monologues too. But I no longer do certain things I used to do. Like third person doesn't interest me anymore. And being indie, I don't have to do it that way. My editor doesn't object. If my editor doesn't object, I figure it's worth doing. But there's times where I have to change the tone, that I was going somewhere and it went somewhere else, because my characters will literally say and do things that I didn't expect. And sometimes when I write it on the page, I go, nope, I can't let that happen. It doesn't fit with what I want to, the direction I'm going. Or actually, ooh, that's better than the direction I was going. Now I've got to go back to chapter 1 and make a change. Or, because I'm going all over the place, to weave in things that suddenly occur to me that the character would have, done X instead of Y, because they're just themselves and not me. So they surprise me, and I have to make changes based on what those characters seem logically and illogically willing to do.
Sarah Beth, would you have anything on that question?
Yeah, you need to get the music to feel right. The music of the words, the music of the story. And when it does, you get that, when you're putting together a puzzle and you get the piece right and it makes a satisfying click. You want that satisfying click moment when you're writing, and then you've gotten it right. And I can't really describe, there isn't like a clear path of how to get there. But when you get there, it's that moment when you start bouncing your chair, like, oh, I wrote a good sentence. That's really good. You want to tell everybody, and no one knows what you're working on, so nobody else is really like, that's right. You can just feel it. So I say, write until you love it. If there's a part of your story that's boring you, ditch it. Keep the awesome. That's always my goal.
I usually try to do that stuff, the experimentation, earlier rather than later in the process, so I don't have to make major changes later. So if I'm trying to figure out how a character, wants to speak, what tense they want to be in, what their voice sounds like, I'll usually spend some time writing that character, even if it's free writing stuff that isn't going to make it into the book. I'll do some of that off the page, figure out who they are so that I can get into it. With my students, I tend to tell them, I do a couple of exercises where I make them tell a story from one perspective and then tell it from another perspective in the room, and then try it from a fly on the wall, do all the different, and sometimes you find that you were telling it from the wrong perspective. For the most part, I think I've gotten to a point where I know what something wants to be earlier than I used to. So I don't tend to have to hit those again in revision so much. The one other thing I'll add with my new book, We Are Satellites, I knew that I wanted to tell it from the point of view of all the members of the family, except through several iterations, I didn't include the son's voice because he's gotten this implant, and he thinks differently. And I thought if I got into his head, I would be making a lie of it, because he wouldn't be able to show that he's thinking differently, and therefore people, he would just sound like everyone else. And I kept avoiding him, and the book didn't start to click until I finally acknowledged I needed to write him, and that his voice would sound different, and that I was going to have to stylistically go somewhere different for his voice. And doing that just fixed everything that I thought was going wrong in the novel. So, but I was afraid to do it, and I had to sort of embrace that I was going to do something wacky.
And so put the new question right back to you. What are the sources or inspiration for the revising you do? What are the voices you most heed, whether it's yourself or family members or book group or beta readers, an agent, an editor? What are the voices you listen to before starting a revision?
So I have, I mean, I trust myself when I read things out loud, but I definitely want those external voices as well. My agent is great. I don't tend to send her short stuff, but for novels, I like to. She's editorial and hands-on, and I like doing that. I am fortunate to have my mother is a writer, and my sisters are fantastic readers, and all three of them are well trained to uh, to give actual feedback. They don't spare my feelings, and they don't and so they're all very astute readers. All of my novels go to them, and then I have a crit group for short fiction that I trust implicitly. Um, I also, like, when I get invited to workshops, I go to workshops. I love the workshop process.
And DH?
So it's generally my editor. It's occasionally a super fan who's read everything in the series I've written, and then will send me a comment with their beta read saying, I wish you did this and not that. And I take that real seriously from a beta reader, because if they've read 6 books up to the 7th and they've never had that instinctive recoil, that they felt if I just did something a little different, they would really love it, I'll look at that and say that may need revising, and I'll even discuss it with my editor, who'll say, go for it. There's nothing wrong with that. But my editor and I talk more frequently now when I don't send her a story before I start working on a story, to really say, this is where I want to take the next one, just to see if she thinks it's a good idea.
A quick follow-up on that. Since you're publishing the work indie, where did you find your editor? Like, it's not like, when the Sears sells something to a magazine or book publisher, there's the editor. Where did you find yours?
I was at a con. I was at Darkover Con in 2010. I was in the business office checking email because the wireless was down. And the person next to me turned out to be the editor of Simgen books for Jacqueline Lichtenberg. So I'm a big fan of that, and had found that she'd been working with Jacqueline and Jean Laura for a very long time. And I then had a book contract not too long later, and she edited the book. So before I gave it to the publisher as a final. So she was very helpful. And she also knows other editors if I need other editors.
And Sarah Beth, same initial question back. What are the voices in your head most prominently when you're working on a revision?
I actually try really hard not to let in the other voices because I find them paralyzing too early in the process. I think it's because when I was a kid, I didn't admit that I wanted to be a writer. I didn't show anybody my writing because, like, I have a good sense of humor, I think, about many things, but I knew I couldn't handle being teased about that because it mattered so much to me. And I think I've carried that through. I tend to not show, I don't workshop, I don't have a writer's group. I don't show my early drafts to anyone. I try to take it as far as I can. And then I bring it to my editor at the publishing house when I've done everything I can think of, and I need that objective outside eye of somebody that hasn't been living within the story every single second to tell me whether what I wanted to put on the page actually made it on the page. So I kind of write for me, and I keep it in my heart until I feel confident in what the story is.
Okay. And then, picking up on a question from Jason Spencer, it's essentially, when do you stop revising? He asks, how close to perfect do you try to get your work before sending it out into the world? So Sarah Beth, you want to keep going on that one?
When you discover you're making it different, not better, that's when you stop.
And how do you decide? Like, is there anything that tells you when that's the stage you're at, or just you kind of get a sense of it?
Instinct, really. I mean, I guess I do write a lot by instinct. When you feel that little clicky click of a puzzle sticking together and it feels right. And yeah, I guess I just feel it. That's really not helpful of me. I'm sorry.
Okay. Sarah Beth. Sarah Pinsker.
Other Sarah. So it depends on whether it's something that's under contract and under deadline. If you're up against a hard deadline, some parts of the idea of perfection may have to go out the window, and hopefully you have enough time to go back to and fix everything that really bothers you. But sometimes you have to let some stuff go. I think there's it's the same thing with novels and with music, that like your first novel you work on for years and years and years and years and years. Your first album you work on for years and years and years, because you're still getting ready to send it to an agent and you're getting ready to make it happen. And then often the second one is under contract and you only have a year to turn the second one around. And so you do have to sort of compact your thinking or compact all of the things you want to do to it.
This is, one of the things in the panel description. You just realized a key character died 100 pages earlier. So let's ask a perhaps embarrassing question, but for all the revising and editing and copy editing and proofreading and everything, is there an embarrassing error that has been pointed out the moment your book or story has actually gone on sale to a reader somewhere? And I'll start that with DH.
My biggest bane of my existence is words that sound like other words that just get by me. Like there and there. After going through the entire manuscript and saying, I finally got every there, IR that it's supposed to be in the right place, someone will complain, oh, you had 3 of those other theirs. And it's like the editor missed it, I missed it, in the rewrite maybe I did it. It just kills me because I'm really trying very hard to proof and reproof because I'm indie. I've only got my editor and myself, and my beta readers will say something on occasion, but I'm the publisher. I'm responsible for every aspect. So if I don't get it right, I need to go back and fix it. And often I'll put second printing type corrections to work on cleaning up things that I shouldn't be cleaning up. I should have gotten in the first place, but it just kills me when that happens.
Sarah Pinsker, you ever had something sneak through?
Nothing worth mentioning. Except that there's a typo on this wasn't my fault, but there's a typo on the cover of the first edition of Sooner or Later Everything Falls into the Sea. And so if you have one of the early copies of the collection, you'll know it because there is there is a letter missing on the cover.
Oh,
But that
I'll
wasn't
have
on
to check
me.
my copy now.
Yeah. Look, it's on the spine is the problem. It wasn't the front, which we all looked at. It wasn't the back, like it wasn't in the copy. It's on the spine. And Karen Osborne is the only person who noticed it. I didn't, like, none of us saw it.
Yay, Karen. Next time I see her, Sarah Beth, you have anything that snuck through the revising process?
Not that made it all the way to the final printed version, but I did have very late in the revision process, I had somebody discover that I had a sunset last about 50 pages. So I really like descriptions of the sky being different colors. And they're like, this can't possibly still be sunset. I was like, oh, yeah. But it did not make it to the final version. So, okay.
Final question. As we, and again, this is going to be another tough year. I don't like making it all easy on people. Is there anything a lot of people might have read where you would say, I wish the author had done this different? And why? You know, a famous book. Anyone have something that they would have done differently?
That we're willing to name.
Yeah, I'm not going to play that game.
Okay.
Yeah, I can tell you that my favorite revision that was done was when Hamlet turns into Lion King. It has a happy ending because Ophelia is a strong character.
I remember Jeffrey writing that one of her books ended up with the wrong title. She wrote Get of the Unicorn, and the publisher published the book as Get Off the Unicorn. And she couldn't do anything about it, ever. And she decided it wasn't so bad.
Okay, so then final thing, which I want to be craft-based then, and I'll start with Sarah Pinsker. If you've got one piece of craft for a writer to keep in mind during a revision process, what would it be?
And I think this will go to Hamza's question about impact of a specific scene. It's that reading it out loud question answer. Like, just the biggest piece of craft advice I will always give is read things out loud. Read it out loud to a person if you have a person to read it to. Watch their face while you read it, if you want to do that, and if you're looking for their literal reactions. Or read it and see how it influences you. Try to read it as a reader, and doing it out loud can help get you out of writer brain and into reader brain also.
Okay, DH.
So when I was in college, I wrote a story and had my roommate read it. He got onto the first page and burst out laughing. And I wasn't writing a humorous piece, but I did write, his eyes fell on the page. After that, I learned that if you're writing fantasy, you don't want to write that. You want to write that he was reading something and not that his eyes fell out, because my roommate saw in his mind, the eyes bouncing up and down. So I learned that I had to be specific and not go to idiom.
Okay, and Sarah Beth, the last word will be had.
This also answers Hamza's question in the Q&A as well. Trust yourself. You've read so many stories and absorbed what works. You know what you like. So trust yourself. If a scene makes you smile, if it makes you cry, if it makes you laugh, chances are it's going to make somebody else smile, laugh, or cry too. So trust your instincts, trust your characters, try to tell your story as honestly as you can. Even though with fantasy and science fiction, we're not writing fact, we're trying to write what's true. So try to be as true to your story as possible, and it'll turn out fine.
Okay, so I'd like to thank everybody for joining me on this Memorial Day. I had some great panelists to work with. there isn't too much left on Balticon after this, and I hope the convention went well for the attendees, and thank you all for joining us in the chat and Q&A contributions. I'll go briefly into the Discord if there's any follow-up. So again, just thank you, everybody. I really had a great discussion with all of you.
Thanks for moderating.
Thank
Thanks
you.
everyone for coming.
Thank you. Bye.